Commander Taman stared at the massive shape floating in the void ahead of his ship and felt his blood turn cold in his veins as the sensors continued their frantic beeping while displaying readings that should not exist according to everything. He knew about space and physics and the basic laws that governed their universe. The thing was huge beyond any reasonable measure, stretching for kilometers in every direction, with a hull made from some dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it back, and strange patterns covered its surface like scars or maybe writing from a civilization that had vanished long ago from the galaxy, leaving only stories and legends behind. Dr. Nari pushed past him to get a better look at the main viewing screen, and her hands trembled as she worked her scanner over the mysterious vessel, while muttering words in her native language that Taman could not understand. But the tone told him everything he needed to know about what they had found drifting here in the empty space between star systems. The research vessel Starweaver had been exploring this sector for 3 months now, searching for any trace of the humans who had simply disappeared from galactic records 3 centuries ago, leaving behind only empty worlds and strange technology that no one could fully understand or replicate, despite decades of trying by the best minds in known space. Captain Wu Jin appeared at Taman's shoulder and pointed at the readings on his tactical display while speaking in a voice that carried the weight of years spent in dangerous situations, where one wrong move could mean death for everyone under his command and responsibility. The energy signatures coming from the human ship were unlike anything in their databases and seemed to pulse with a rhythm that reminded Taman of a heartbeat, or maybe the steady breathing of something very large and very much alive, despite the fact that the vessel showed no signs of active propulsion or life support systems running. Dr. Nari suddenly gasped and stepped back from her scanner as if she had been burned by touching something too hot, while her face went pale and her eyes grew wide with a mixture of fear and excitement that made Taman wonder what exactly she had discovered about their mysterious find. She turned to face him and spoke in a whisper that somehow carried clearly across the bridge, despite the constant hum of their ship's systems and the nervous chatter of the crew members who were all staring at the alien vessel through the main viewport with expressions of wonder and growing unease. The ship was definitely human in origin according to her analysis, but it came from a time period that most scholars believed was nothing more than myth and legend, wrapped up in stories told by survivors who had witnessed things that stretched the boundaries of what rational minds could accept as real. This was a sleeper ship from the War of Crimson Stars, when humanity had fought against something so terrible that they had been willing to sacrifice entire worlds and billions of lives just to slow down an enemy that consumed not just matter and energy, but the very concept of existence itself. Taman felt his stomach drop as he realized what they had stumbled across in this forgotten corner of space, because the stories spoke of warrior humans who had been enhanced beyond normal limits and trained to fight enemies that existed partially outside of normal reality using weapons that worked through sheer determination rather than physics. The tactical officer at his station suddenly called out a warning as the human ship began to emit new energy patterns while strange lights flickered along its hull in sequences that seemed almost like communication attempts or maybe warnings to stay away from something that was better left undisturbed. Captain Wu Jin immediately ordered shields raised and weapon systems brought online while moving the Starweaver to a safer distance from the mysterious vessel. But even as they retreated, the energy readings continued to climb toward levels that their instruments had never recorded before. Dr. Nari was frantically working her equipment and scanning through databases that contained every known fact about human technology, while muttering that the power output they were detecting should be impossible for a ship that had been drifting dead in space for 300 years without any external power source. The bridge light suddenly dimmed as something invisible but powerful swept across their ship like a scanning beam that probed every system and every person aboard, while leaving behind a strange tingling sensation that made everyone's skin crawl with the feeling of being examined by an intelligence that was vast and ancient and not entirely friendly. Then the scanning stopped as abruptly as it had begun, and the human ship went quiet again, except for a single new signal that appeared on their communication array and consisted of patterns that their translation computers could not interpret, but somehow felt familiar in a way that made Taman's mind itch. With half-remembered dreams, Dr. Nari worked frantically with the signal, trying to decode its meaning while explaining that early human languages had been based on mathematical concepts that expressed not just information, but emotional states and psychological conditions that could affect the listener in ways that went beyond simple communication. The message finally resolved into something their systems could process, and when the translation appeared on the main screen, every person on the bridge fell silent as they read words that had been waiting in the dark for 3 centuries to be heard by anyone who might be listening. It was a simple greeting, followed by a question that chilled them all because it assumed things about the current state of the galaxy that might no longer be true and revealed expectations that spoke of preparations for a war that everyone hoped had ended long ago with humanity's disappearance. The message asked about enemy positions and requested updated tactical information while identifying the sender as AI System Hana, who was responsible for maintaining the ship's cargo of 1,000 enhanced warriors, who had been placed in suspended animation until they were needed for the final battle against forces that threatened all life. Taemin realized that they had found more than just an ancient human vessel drifting in space, because this ship contained the last survivors of humanity's most desperate hour when they had been fighting something so terrible that even their enhanced warriors had been kept in reserve for the moment when all other hope was gone. The AI continued transmitting and explained that the warriors aboard were beginning to wake up after receiving a coded signal that indicated the enemy had returned, and that their services were required once again to defend a galaxy that they had helped save through sacrifices that no one else could make. Captain Wu Jin looked at Taemin with an expression that mixed excitement with dread, because they all knew the stories about human warriors from that era and what they were capable of when pushed to their limits by circumstances that demanded impossible solutions to unsolvable problems. The human ship suddenly blazed with light as its systems came fully online, for the first time in 3 centuries, while massive bay doors began opening along its hull to reveal weapons that looked more like pieces of abstract art than anything designed for practical combat, but somehow radiated menace that made everyone on the Starweaver step back instinctively. AI system Hana transmitted one final message that would change everything they thought they knew about their peaceful galaxy and the quiet centuries that had passed since humanity vanished from the stars, leaving behind only empty worlds and legends about their final war. The message was simple and direct, and carried within it the promise of revelations that would reshape their understanding of history, while bringing back memories of conflicts that everyone had hoped were finished forever when the last human ship had disappeared into the darkness between worlds. 1,000 warriors were awakening from their long sleep, and they expected to find a war waiting for them. The first warrior emerged from his sleep chamber like death itself, rising from a tomb while ice crystals fell from his enhanced body, and his eyes opened to reveal pupils that glowed with an inner light that had never been seen in any natural creature born under normal stars. Colonel Do-hyun stepped onto the deck of his ship and immediately assumed a combat stance while scanning his surroundings for threats and enemies, even though he had just awakened from 3 centuries of suspended animation and should have needed time to recover from the deep sleep that had preserved his life. His enhanced muscles moved with fluid precision as he reached for weapons that materialized in his hands from hidden compartments built into his armor, while his augmented senses processed information from every available source to build a complete tactical picture of his current situation in seconds. Behind him, more warriors emerged from their chambers and formed defensive positions without speaking or hesitating, because they had trained together for years before their long sleep and knew each other's capabilities better than they knew their own names or faces in mirrors. Major Sun-hee appeared at his side, and her movements were so fast that normal eyes could barely track them while she deployed scanning equipment that analyzed the air and detected chemical signatures that told her everything she needed to know about who had been aboard their ship recently. The readings showed alien life forms had been present, which meant they were no longer in human space and 300 years had passed according to their ship's chronometer, though it felt like only moments since they had closed their eyes and accepted the cold embrace of suspended animation. Sergeant Hyunwoo emerged from the lower decks leading a squad of warriors who carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy, while their enhanced bodies moved with the deadly grace of predators who had been trained to fight enemies that existed beyond the normal boundaries of space and time. Colonel Do-hyun activated his communications array and immediately began receiving reports from AI System Hana, who explained that they had been discovered by aliens calling themselves Althorians and that the War of Crimson Stars had ended while humanity had vanished from galactic records. The news hit the warriors like a physical blow because they had expected to awaken to battle and instead found themselves in a galaxy where peace had reigned for centuries while their entire species had disappeared without explanation or trace. Dr. Yunji moved between the awakening warriors while checking their vital signs and ensuring that their enhanced physiology had survived the long sleep without degradation or system failures that could compromise their combat effectiveness when they were needed. Most, she carried medical equipment that could repair damage at the cellular level while monitoring biosignatures that showed these warriors were operating at physical parameters that would kill normal humans, but were perfectly acceptable for soldiers who had been modified to fight impossible wars. The young warrior Kiho stumbled as he emerged from his chamber, because he had been the newest member of their unit when they entered suspended animation, and still felt overwhelmed by the enhancements that had been made to his body and mind. Colonel Do-hyun placed a steady hand on the young man's shoulder and spoke in a voice that carried the authority of someone who had led warriors through battles that normal minds could not comprehend or accept as real without losing their sanity. He explained that they were no longer in their own time, and that the galaxy had changed in ways they needed to understand before they could determine what their mission should be in this new era, where their skills might not be needed or wanted by civilizations that had forgotten War Major Sun Hee approached with a tactical report that showed their ship was surrounded by alien vessels whose technology was advanced but seemed designed for peaceful purposes rather than combat, which puzzled warriors who had never seen ships that were not built for fighting. The Althorian vessels carried scientific equipment and exploration tools but no weapon systems that the enhanced warriors could detect, despite their augmented senses and analysis capabilities that could identify threats across multiple dimensions of reality. Sergeant Hyun-woo reported that his scans of the surrounding space showed no signs of the Void Devourers that had been their primary enemy during the War of Crimson Stars, which seemed impossible because those entities were relentless and would never stop consuming reality. Yunji accessed the historical databases that AI system Hana had compiled during their sleep and discovered that the galaxy had indeed achieved peace, but at a cost that none of the warriors could have imagined when they accepted their mission. Humanity had sacrificed itself to stop the Void Devourers by using weapons and tactics that were so extreme they had erased themselves from existence while saving every other species in the galaxy from annihilation and consumption. The warriors stood in silence as they processed this information because they had been trained to fight and die for humanity's survival, but they had never considered that their victory might require them to outlive their own species. Colonel Do-hyun felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders as he realized that his 1,000 warriors were now the last representatives of humanity in a galaxy that had forgotten their sacrifice while building civilizations on foundations made from human blood and determination. He ordered his people to prepare for contact with the aliens while maintaining combat readiness, because 3 centuries of peace did not guarantee that threats were gone forever, and warriors who had fought the Void Devourers knew that evil could return without warning. The communications array crackled to life as the Althorian ship transmitted messages of greeting and requests for peaceful contact while assuring the human warriors that they meant no harm and only wanted to understand who they were and where they came from. AI system Hana provided translation services while analyzing the alien communications for hidden meanings or threats that might not be apparent to minds that had not been trained to recognize deception in all its forms. Major Sun Hee recommended accepting the alien contact, but with full tactical precautions, because their enhanced senses could detect lies and hostile intentions, even when they were carefully hidden behind diplomatic language and peaceful gestures. Colonel Do-hyun agreed and ordered the preparation of a meeting space while ensuring that his warriors were positioned to respond instantly to any threat that might emerge from what appeared to be a simple diplomatic encounter. The first face-to-face meeting between the awakened human warriors and the Althorian explorers would take place in the ship's main conference room, which had been designed to accommodate negotiations with alien species during humanity's earlier period of galactic expansion. Dr. Yunji prepared medical scanners that could analyze alien physiology, while Sergeant Hyun-woo positioned his warriors to provide security without appearing overtly threatening To beings who had lived in peace for 3 centuries, Kiho asked why they needed to be so careful with aliens who seemed friendly, and Dr. Unji explained that warriors who had fought the Void Devourers could never afford to assume that any contact was truly safe because their enemies had mastered the art of deception. The young warrior nodded and checked his weapons while remembering his training about entities that could appear as anything they chose while slowly consuming the reality around them until nothing remained but empty space and forgotten memories. Colonel Do-hyun reviewed the tactical situation one final time and realized that his warriors might be the most dangerous beings in the current galaxy because they had been designed to fight enemies that no longer existed using methods that peaceful civilizations could not understand. He wondered if they were heroes awakening to receive the gratitude they deserved, or weapons that had outlived their purpose and might now be more dangerous than the enemies they had been created to fight. The answer would come soon enough when they met the aliens face to face and discovered what role 1,000 ancient warriors might play in a galaxy that had moved beyond the need for their particular skills and deadly expertise. The data cores contained memories of Admiral Jae-sung making decisions that would haunt any normal person for the rest of their lives, while standing on the bridge of his flagship as entire worlds burned behind him, and billions of people died, to slow down enemies that consumed existence itself. Colonel Do-hyun watched the holographic records play out before the assembled Althorian delegation, and saw their faces grow pale with horror as they began to understand the true nature of the war that humanity had fought to save a galaxy that never knew how close it came to complete annihilation. The Void Devourers appeared on the historical displays as shifting masses of darkness that seemed to eat light and space and time while leaving behind emptiness that was worse than death, because it erased the very concept that anything had ever existed in those locations. Dr. Nari from the Althorian ship pressed her hands against her mouth as she watched human fleets throw themselves into hopeless battles against entities that could not be killed by conventional weapons because they existed partially outside normal reality, where physics had no meaning. Engineer Minho activated additional memory banks and showed the aliens how humanity had developed weapons that worked through determination rather than science, while creating tools that functioned because their operators refused to accept that they should not work. The impossibility. Weapons gleamed in the holographic displays, like crystallized stubbornness, while human warriors wielded devices that bent reality through sheer force of will and made the universe conform to their expectations rather than its own natural laws. Aden So Young appeared in the historical records as she piloted ships through spaces that did not exist while navigating by dead reckoning and pure bloody-mindedness, through dimensions where normal instruments failed and only human intuition could find the way. Ambassador Yu Jin spoke from the recorded memories about humanity's final diplomatic efforts to convince other species to join the fight against the Void Devourers. But most civilizations could not even perceive the threat until it was too late to resist. The Althorians learned that their peaceful galaxy existed only because humanity had been willing to sacrifice everything, including their own existence, to create weapons and strategies that could fight enemies who consumed the building blocks of reality. Admiral Jae-sung made his final transmission from the last human stronghold, while explaining that the 1,000 warriors in suspended animation were humanity's ultimate reserve to be awakened only if the Void Devourers returned and all other defenses failed. The holographic admiral looked directly at the camera with eyes that had seen too much death, and spoke words that carried the weight of an entire species accepting extinction to save others who would never know what had been done for them. He explained that the human enhancement programs had created warriors whose physiology allowed them to perceive and fight entities that existed in the spaces between atoms while using weapons powered by concepts that should not work but did anyway. Enhanced warriors could see threats that normal minds could not process without going insane, while their modified bodies could survive in environments where reality itself was under attack by forces that sought to reduce everything to nothingness. Colonel Do-hyun paused the historical playback and turned to address the Althorian delegation, while explaining that his people represented the last echo of humanity's determination to protect a galaxy that had forgotten their sacrifice. Dr. Yoonji accessed medical files that showed how human volunteers had allowed themselves to be modified beyond recognition, while accepting enhancements that would let them fight impossible battles using tactics that violated every known law of warfare and physics. The Genetic modifications allowed human warriors to maintain their sanity while fighting enemies whose very presence could drive normal minds to madness through exposure to concepts that should not exist in any rational universe. Sergeant Hyun-woo demonstrated his enhanced capabilities by moving through dimensions that the Althorians could not see, while manipulating tools that worked by imposing human will on resistant reality through methods that resembled magic more than technology. Aliens watched in amazement as Kehoe casually performed feats that their most advanced science could not explain, while using equipment that should not function according to any known principles, but worked perfectly because humans believed it. Should Commander Taemin asked how humanity had discovered that determination and stubbornness could be weaponized against cosmic threats, and Dr. Yoon-ji explained that desperation had forced them to try solutions that seemed impossible until they worked. The War of Crimson Stars had pushed humanity beyond all rational limits while forcing them to develop new relationships with reality that allowed their enhanced warriors to fight battles in spaces where normal laws did not apply. Major Sun-hee activated tactical displays that showed the final battles where human fleets had sacrificed themselves to drive the Void Devourers back into the spaces between galaxies, while sealing dimensional rifts with weapons powered by pure stubbornness. Last human worlds had been evacuated through tears in reality, while warriors held defensive positions that should not have been defensible, using strategies that made no sense to any rational military mind, but somehow worked anyway. Admiral Jae-sung appeared again in the historical records as he explained the final gambit that would save the galaxy by erasing humanity from existence while leaving behind only the 1,000 enhanced warriors as a failsafe against future threats. The Admiral spoke about weapons that existed because humans refused to accept that they could not build them, while describing tactics that worked through aggressive reality maintenance rather than traditional military science. Captain Woo Jin interrupted the playback to ask about specific technologies that appeared in the records, and Engineer Minho demonstrated devices that functioned by making the universe angry enough to reject threats that tried to consume it from within. The spite drives that powered human ships worked by convincing reality that certain things were simply not acceptable, while creating propulsion through organized stubbornness that pushed vessels through space faster than light should allow. Ambassador Yu Jin appeared in diplomatic records where she explained to other species that humanity's approach to impossible problems was to refuse to acknowledge that they were impossible, while developing solutions through sheer bloody-minded determination. The historical files contained footage of human warriors fighting void devourers in hand-to-hand combat, while using weapons that carved pieces out of nothingness and threw them back at enemies who consumed existence for sustenance. Dr. Nari asked how such battles could be won, and Colonel Do-hyun explained that victory came not through superior firepower, but through humanity's absolute refusal to surrender, even when facing enemies that could erase them from reality. The enhanced warriors had been trained to fight with their entire being while using every aspect of human nature as a weapon against foes, who could not understand concepts like stubbornness and determination and spite. Major Sun-hee showed tactical footage of humans holding defensive positions that existed only because they insisted they should exist while firing weapons that worked because their operators believed they would work, despite all evidence to the contrary. The final battle records showed Admiral Jae-sung activating the reality anchor while speaking his last words about humanity's gift to the galaxy, being the knowledge that impossible problems sometimes required impossible solutions. The holographic displays went dark as the historical playback ended, and the Althorians sat in stunned silence while processing the revelation that their peaceful civilization had been built on foundations made from human sacrifice and determination. Colonel Do-hyun looked at the alien delegation and explained that long-range sensors were detecting familiar energy signatures at the galaxy's edge, which meant the Void Devourers were returning, and only his 1,000 warriors knew how to fight them. The ancient war was about to begin again, and this time, humanity's enhanced warriors would have to teach an entire galaxy how to fight enemies that consumed existence itself, while using weapons powered by stubborn refusal to accept defeat. General Dong-wook emerged from the depths of the human ship, carrying battle plans that had been written in the blood of billions, while his enhanced mind processed tactical scenarios that would have driven normal commanders insane with their impossible complexity and brutal mathematics. The Althorian military leaders gathered around him struggled to understand warfare concepts that treated reality as another battlefield, where victory required soldiers to maintain existence through sheer force of will while fighting enemies that consumed the foundations of space and time. Commander G1 began training alien warriors in psychological resistance techniques that taught them how to keep existing when reality was being erased around them, while maintaining their sanity in the face of horrors that should not be possible in any rational universe. The aliens found it difficult to grasp human concepts of fighting with impossible determination because their species had evolved in peaceful environments where cooperation and logic were the primary tools for solving problems, rather than stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Technician Heijin worked frantically with alien engineers to adapt human technology to physiology that had not been enhanced for impossible warfare while explaining that their weapons functioned through organized anger, rather than conventional physics. The spite drives that powered human vessels needed operators who could maintain sufficient levels of indignation to convince reality that their ships deserved to move faster than light while carrying weapons that worked, because someone was mad enough to make them work. Warrior monk Chang Su represented humanity's spiritual approach to impossible warfare while teaching alien soldiers meditation techniques that involved getting so angry at the universe that it would bend to their will, rather than risk continued annoyance from stubborn human minds. The training sessions took place across multiple star systems as the 1,000 human warriors split into specialized teams, while spreading their knowledge to military forces that had never faced enemies requiring impossible solutions to survive encounters. Commander G1 demonstrated psychological warfare tactics that worked by making reality itself annoyed with threats that dared to exist in spaces where they were not wanted, while teaching aliens to project sufficient disapproval to make void devourers uncomfortable. The alien soldiers struggled with concepts that required them to fight battles using emotions as weapons, while maintaining levels of determination that could reshape local space-time through applications of pure stubbornness applied with surgical precision. Technician Heijin showed Althorian engineers how to build weapons that functioned through aggressive reality maintenance, while explaining that the key was to make the universe sufficiently irritated with enemies that it would actively reject their presence. The manufacturing process for impossibility weapons required workers who could maintain appropriate levels of spite while assembling devices that should not work, but did anyway, because their creators refused to accept that they could not build them. General Dongwook established the doctrine of stubborn existence, which taught military commanders how to hold positions that existed only because someone insisted they should exist while deploying troops who fought with their entire being as a weapon. The tactical manual contained strategies for battles that took place in multiple dimensions, simultaneously while requiring soldiers to maintain existence through organized refusal to accept that they could be erased from reality by enemies. Warrior monk Chang Su demonstrated combat techniques that worked purely because humans refused to acknowledge they should not work, while teaching alien warriors how to fight with weapons powered by concepts rather than conventional energy sources. The training exercises involved scenarios where reality was under active attack by forces that consumed the basic building blocks of existence, while requiring defenders to maintain their positions through applications of determination that bordered on the supernatural. Commander G1 taught psychological resistance by showing alien soldiers how to remain angry enough at the universe to keep existing when void devourers attempted to erase them while fighting battles that took place in the spaces between thoughts. The aliens found it difficult to achieve sufficient levels of indignation to power their weapons effectively, because their peaceful cultures had not prepared them for warfare that required emotional states as ammunition for impossible battles. Technician Heijin adapted human technology to alien physiology, while explaining that their ships needed crews who could maintain appropriate levels of stubborn refusal to accept that faster-than-light travel should be impossible in normal space. The modifications required careful attention to species-specific psychology, because different aliens needed different approaches to achieving the mental states necessary for operating weapons that functioned through organized anger at the universe. General Dongwook reviewed battle plans that accounted for enemies who existed partially outside normal reality, while deploying forces that could fight in dimensions where conventional military tactics were useless against threats that consumed existence. The strategic overview included deployment patterns for warriors who could perceive threats that normal minds could not process, while maintaining combat effectiveness in environments where reality itself was under attack by hostile forces. Warrior monk Changsu taught meditation techniques that involved achieving transcendent states of annoyance with cosmic threats, while maintaining sufficient spiritual anger to power weapons that worked through applications of justified indignation. The training montages showed aliens learning to fight impossible battles while using weapons that should not exist, but functioned perfectly because their operators had achieved appropriate levels of determination mixed with creative. Spite Commander Ji-Wan demonstrated advanced psychological warfare by showing how human warriors could make reality itself uncomfortable with enemies, while teaching aliens to project disapproval that could affect entities existing in multiple dimensions. The alien students gradually began to understand human approaches to impossible problems, while learning that victory sometimes required refusing to acknowledge that defeat was possible even when facing overwhelming odds. Technician He-Jin completed modifications to alien technology that allowed peaceful species to operate weapons powered by concepts that violated physics while maintaining sufficient levels of anger to make their equipment function properly. The adapted spite drives began working with alien crews who had learned to achieve appropriate emotional states while operating ships that moved through space by making the universe sufficiently annoyed to let them pass. General Dong-wook deployed his enhanced warriors across the galaxy while establishing training facilities where aliens could learn to fight battles that required them to maintain existence through sheer bloody-minded refusal to surrender. The 1,000 human warriors took positions at key strategic points while teaching local forces how to recognize threats that existed in the spaces between atoms, while fighting enemies that consumed the concept of existence itself. Warrior Monk Changsu established spiritual centers where aliens could learn meditation techniques that involved getting angry enough at cosmic threats to reshape local reality, while maintaining sufficient indignation to power impossible weapons. The final preparations were completed as long-range sensors detected the approaching Void Devourer fleet, while enhanced human warriors readied themselves for battles that would determine whether reality itself could survive another assault. The galaxy prepared for war using weapons that worked through stubborn determination, while depending on soldiers who had learned to fight with their entire existence as ammunition against enemies that sought to reduce everything to nothingness. General Dong-wook issued final orders to forces that would soon face impossible odds while hoping that 3 centuries of peace had not made the galaxy too soft to fight wars that required impossible solutions to survive. Field Marshal In-ho stood on the bridge of the combined fleet command ship while watching reality itself tear apart at the galaxy's edge as Void Devourers began their assault on existence, using methods that made normal warfare look like children playing with toys. The first enemy contact came not as ships or weapons but as spreading zones of nothingness that consumed entire star systems, while leaving behind emptiness that was worse than death, because it erased the very memory that anything had ever existed there. Captain Ye-Jin led the human-trained alien forces into battle, using weapons that fired concentrated stubbornness at enemies who existed in the gaps between atoms while maintaining formation through sheer bloody-minded determination to keep reality intact. The enhanced warriors moved through dimensions that normal minds could not perceive, while fighting battles that took place in multiple layers of existence simultaneously, as Void Devourers attacked the basic concepts that held the universe together. Specialist Boram operated scanning equipment that detected threats existing in spaces where mathematics had no meaning, while coordinating defensive positions that existed only because someone insisted they should exist, despite all evidence to the contrary. The Althorian crews struggled with weapons that required appropriate levels of anger to function properly, while learning to fight enemies that could not be killed through conventional means because they consumed the very idea of being killed. Veteran Kyung Min carried memories of humanity's greatest victories, while leading assault teams into combat zones where reality was actively dissolving under attack from forces that sought to reduce all existence to comfortable nothingness. The battle expanded across multiple dimensions as enhanced human warriors taught their alien allies how to fight in spaces where up and down were meaningless concepts, while maintaining sufficient determination to keep existing against impossible odds. Captain Ye Jin received reports from forward reconnaissance teams who had made contact with the main Void Devourer fleet and discovered that these entities had learned new methods of consuming reality during their centuries of exile. The enemy mothership existed as a construct that defied every known law of physics, while spreading zones of unbeing that erased not just matter and energy, but the underlying concepts that made existence possible in normal space field. Marshal Inho coordinated defensive operations across 17 star systems simultaneously, while deploying human warriors who could fight battles that normal tactical doctrine could not address because they violated basic assumptions about warfare. The alien forces began to understand human combat philosophy as they learned to fight with weapons powered by justified indignation, while maintaining battle lines through applications of stubborn refusal to accept that they could lose. Specialist Boram detected massive reality distortions approaching the core worlds and realized that the Void Devourers were preparing to deploy their ultimate weapon, which would consume the galactic center and spread nothingness throughout known space. The human warriors responded by activating contingency plans that had been developed during humanity's final battles, while preparing weapons that existed only because their creators had been too angry to accept that they could not build them. Veteran Kyung Min led a strike force toward the enemy mothership, while explaining to his alien allies that victory would require them to fight not just for their lives but for the right to continue existing in a universe that was under attack. The assault teams moved through spaces that existed between normal dimensions, while carrying weapons that functioned through organized spite, applied with precision that would have been impossible for minds that accepted rational limitations. Captain Ye Jin discovered that the Void Devourer mothership could only be reached by traveling through zones where reality was already partially consumed, which meant her forces would have to fight while maintaining existence through pure determination. The mission required warriors who could survive in environments where the basic concepts of space and time were under active attack, while using weapons that worked, because their operators refused to believe they should not work. Field Marshal Inho authorized deployment of the reality anchor, while knowing that activation would require someone to manually hold the device steady, while reality reformed itself around them, at the cost of whoever volunteered for the task. Specialist Boram began the startup sequence for humanity's ultimate weapon, while explaining that the reality anchor worked by forcing the universe to remember what it should be, rather than what the Void Devourers wanted it to become. The device required an operator whose enhanced physiology could survive direct contact with the fundamental forces that held existence together, while maintaining sufficient stubbornness to impose human will on resistant cosmic principles. Veteran Kyung Min volunteered for the manual operation while knowing that his enhanced body was the most likely to survive long enough to complete the activation sequence, even though success would mean certain death. The final assault began as Captain Ye Jin led her forces into the heart of the Void Devourer mothership, while fighting through zones where existence was being actively consumed by entities that fed on the concept of being real. The battles took place in spaces that should not exist, while human warriors used weapons that carved pieces out of nothingness and threw them back at enemies who consumed existence itself as their primary form of sustenance. Specialist Boram activated the reality anchor while veteran Kyung Min placed his hands on controls that burned with the fundamental forces of creation, while refusing to let go even as his enhanced body began to break down under impossible stresses. The universe responded to human stubbornness by rejecting the presence of Void Devourers while restoring concepts of existence that had been consumed by entities whose very presence violated the basic assumptions of rational reality. Captain Ye Jin fought her way to the core of the enemy mothership and discovered that it could only be destroyed by someone willing to sacrifice their connection to normal space-time while manually overloading systems that existed outside physics. The victory came not through superior firepower, but through humanity's signature trait of absolute refusal to surrender, even when facing enemies that could erase them from existence while consuming the very concept of defeat. Veteran Kyung Min held reality together with his bare hands, while his enhanced physiology finally failed under the strain of forcing the universe to conform to human expectations rather than cosmic indifference to mortal concerns. The void devourers were driven back into the spaces between galaxies, while their mothership collapsed under the weight of imposed reality that refused to accept that such entities deserved to exist in normal spacetime. The surviving warriors stood victorious on battlefields that existed only because they had insisted on maintaining them, while using weapons that worked because humans had been too stubborn to accept that they should not function field. Marshal Inho surveyed the aftermath of battles that had saved reality itself, while knowing that the 1,000 enhanced warriors had proven once again that impossible problems sometimes required impossible solutions applied with sufficient determination. The galaxy entered a new era where alien civilizations understood that peace was possible, only because humanity's warriors remained ready to fight wars that required weapons powered by organized stubbornness applied against threats that consumed. Existence Captain Ye Jin established memorials for warriors who had died holding reality together, while teaching new generations that the universe worked because humans were too bloody-minded to let it break under cosmic pressure. The surviving, enhanced warriors chose to remain awake and active, while serving as guardians who understood that some threats could only be fought by people who refused to acknowledge that defeat was possible, even against impossible odds. The galaxy prepared for whatever new threats might emerge from deep space while remembering that sometimes the greatest victory was simply refusing to lose no matter how overwhelming the odds might appear to rational minds. The final transmission from the enhanced warriors carried a message that spread throughout known space and became the motto for all future defenders who might face enemies requiring impossible solutions to survive impossible battles. The message was simple and direct and carried within it the essence of humanity's gift to the universe, which was the knowledge that stubborn determination could overcome any threat, no matter how cosmic in scope. Come and try it.